Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today actually, um, I'm doing a video about. Let me see here, bring it up real quick. It's kind of interesting, right? Probably around 2015, 2016, this whole idea came into my head, and I wrote some blog post about it, and it's about how Robert A. Heinlein, the author of Starship Troopers, I believe he wrote it in 1959, I want to say. A classic of military science fiction, probably one of the first true military science fiction books. Um, in that book by Heinlein, he predicted, in my opinion, this love of the West or conservatives for Russia, basically, because in that book he wrote about the Russo Anglo American alliance, and it is kind of strange to me that like nobody else has really talked about this, like especially on YouTube or anything like that. It's kind of particularly with there's already pretty in extensive philosophical analyses sort of videos about Robert Heinlein's philosophy, etc. But nobody's talking about how in that book, which I've read twice. Um, once, once I want to say I was probably a sophomore in college, and then the other time was probably in my early 30s as I kind of came, or mid 30s, as I came across this idea or whatnot about how in this book they literally talk about Russia merging with the West in order to fight China. This was predicted by Robert Heinlein in 1959. So if you have, I'm not trying to like toot my own horn or anything like that. And for whatever reason, I mean, it is what it is, but maybe my idea didn't catch on that well or something. But it seems like it's kind of true. And what's interesting is I may have to do another video on this, is that even though Heinlein was arguing for, or not, he wasn't hardcore arguing for, but he presented this idea of the Russo-Anglo-American alliance in Starship Troopers. I actually discovered a countering, what I call argument to that idea by another science fiction author, Orson Scott Card of the Ender's Game universe, right? Because in the universe by Orson Scott Card, he presents an alternate kind of speculative foreign policy where Russia and China unite in kind of a Sino-Russian, Sino-Soviet kind of alliance, which actually is more true than not in our in the real world, in which Russia actually via a fictional pact called the Second Warsaw Pact actually reconquers Eastern Europe, which is something that, as we're seeing with Putin in Ukraine, and also funding anti-European Union candidates and far-right candidates to destabilize the European Union and promote Euroscepticism, seems to be true. So, if I were to write a paper, right, the paper would basically be the Robert Heinlein foreign policy thesis versus the Orson Scott Card foreign policy thesis, right? In which the Heinlein one favors Russia, whereas the Orson Scott Card one actually is suspicious of Russia and everything like that. And I'll read some quotes from the books, which I put in my blog post. But the main agenda of this video is to talk about the Russo-Anglo American alliance, which I think Robert Heinlein predicted, and as crazy as it sounds, is kind of coming true, as we're seeing through the fawning of the Republican Party, or at least conservative pundits, right? And far right pundits for Russia, from Nick Fuentes loving Russia to Lauren Southern to Tucker Carlson to Madison Cawthorn to Trump himself to Jay Dyer, who was kind of like an online kind of conspiracy analysis type guy who has ties to Alex Jones, and some of the people in the comedian space like Sam Hyde. Proud Boys. I mean, it goes on and on, right? A lot of the right wing love and affinity for the modern Russian state, which they see as, let's just be real, saviors of what they consider to be white conservative Christendom, right? Against what they perceive as, the degeneracy of modernists, postmodernists, what they would allege or attack it as being, liberal democracies, which are about, including women and feminism, or about being inclusive to LGBTQ, or about, uh, having, being accepting of immigrants into countries. So you're seeing like these policy debates, right? These cultural divides between the ethno-nationalist and people who are more pro, or accepting of immigrants, not even necessarily from a true multicultural standpoint, right? Because multiculturalism is a philosophy on into itself. Multiculturalism, you can almost argue, has bad and good tenets, or it can mean it's kind of a subjective term. The right wing paints multiculturalism as just being diversity, right? So therefore, when they're saying we're against multiculturalism, it's really a dog whistle about maintaining white supremacy. Really, they're not in many cases, right? Whereas multiculturalism can mean a lot of different things, such as, sure, you may have different cultures in the same country, not, necessarily exchanging as much. So there can be technically a negative side to that, right? But multiculturalism could also just mean you have a lot of different cultures in a society and people are sharing things. Like, it's not that it's so, even terms like multiculturalism are kind of ambiguous or vague. But what we're seeing though in right wing politics is a negative reaction against it, right? But regardless, before I get too off track, is that it's very apparent more than ever before, from the current Zelensky meeting with Trump and JD Vance to Donald Trump's behavior at the Helsinki conference, in which he, handed a soccer ball over to Putin. Even though it seems like these are gestures about peace, so be it, right? Okay. But what I'm saying is, it seems to be actually mimicking the Russo Anglo American alliance, right? So Russia for Russia, Anglo actually for the United Kingdom, right? Because what happened in the United Kingdom? Brexit. Brexit was also another part of this kind of global nationalist, populist, right wing, fascist sort of reactionary movement, right? And you have to be real. There's a lot of Russian oligarchs in the United Kingdom and everything. There's a lot of there's a lot of cultural and economic exchange between Great Britain and even Russia, from money to, one can even say, even technically when it comes to the whole notion of monarchy, right? When it comes to even the royal family, they have Russian roots. Tsar Nicholas was a grandchild of Queen Victoria. So like there's even, I think I read somewhere too that even like way before, long time ago, when like Prince Henry was young, there was like some like monarchist faction in like Russia who wanted like him to actually be like the new like czar or something. I think I read something about that like a long time ago. Don't, you may have to look that up yourself. But regardless, right? The world we're living in, I am arguing, is kind of what Robert Heinlein predicted. And if you know the philosophy of Robert Heinlein, which we'll go more into detail about, he's kind of like a Joe Rogan character. In a weird way, if Joe Rogan actually wrote science fiction, the science fiction would kind of be, I would assume, kind of like Robert Heinlein. And what I mean by that is that Heinlein had a syncretic, kind of almost third position like political discourse, like, or belief system. Uh, he was kind of left leaning, as far as, or put it this way, he was essentially just a libertarian. He was a libertarian who actually believed in a strong state, which seems counterintuitive, but he believed in a strong state from a militaristic type standpoint, almost like a policeman state, in which like the state only serves a purpose to like have monopoly on force, whereas everybody in that society is kind of operating under like some libertarian ethos or something, right? So I think he saw his societies as kind of like the logical conclusion of classical liberalism, right? Classical liberalism in space. essentially, or classical liberalism in the 25th century or whatever, right? Is kind of the worldview of Heinlein. So like, even though he seemed left leaning in certain ways, because he did have an impact, interestingly, on the early hippie movement and counterculture movement, he was also a big fan in the right wing movement, particularly with a lot of his stances in the Cold War, about being anti-communist, and about preemptively using nuclear weapons and stuff like that. So he's a very interesting character, and I compare him to Joe Rogan because that's how Joe kind of is, right? He's kind of seems like, oh, we all need peace and love and get together, and he's like a right wing hippie, basically, right? Is like a caveman paleo conservative hippie, a Burning Man, far out psychonaut Republican is the best way to really describe Heinlein's political reality as seen through a person. Like this, like they're hippies, but they're also like right wing. And it's very interesting is that this political ethos seems to be very apparent actually in Generation X. So even though we do a lot of analysis about baby boomers, I want to say Generation X, because they grew up under Reagan, they grew up under the idea. A lot of them have negative opinions or misleading opinions about like socialism, for example, right? And I'm not here to advocate for that, but I'm saying is that me myself as an older millennial born in the mid to late 80s, who was essentially just the younger kid brother to Gen X, I can actually attest to this. Is that there was just we were kind of conformed to the capitalist consumerist culture, even though we were this Gen X postmodern MTV generation, rebellious nihilist type thing spliced in with it. But ultimately, underneath the surface of it, as we get older, we're just kind of, let's be real, turning into our parents. And Joe Rogan is kind of the epitome of that, which is why he's just becoming like a grumpy old, what we would consider the equivalent of a boomer or whatnot, because Gen X is on the same trajectory. They just had a more different, rebellious culture that they grew up in, even though it was all kind of, designed to be part of the classical liberal tradition and everything, with all of its flaws and everything like that, right? But regardless, the world we're living in, I'm arguing, it really seems like the Starship Trooper stuff, right? And even think about Elon Musk and like, what he's doing, right? The whole rise of technocrats like Peter Thiel, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and everything. Everybody they're all obsessed with outer space, right? Which of course harkens to science fiction. And I would not be surprised if Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, these guys, being nerds, read science fiction. I wouldn't be surprised if they read Starship Troopers. I wouldn't be surprised if they read the entire canon of the Ender's Game series. I wouldn't be surprised if they read, Asimov and all the greats, Philip K. Dick stuff, right? But the thing is that instead of them like seeing the warnings in science fiction, they see inspiration in these kind of totalitarian societies that are presented in these science fiction books, which are often kind of nerd ran meritocracies and everything like that, right? So it's very interesting. So before, I know I'm kind of going off here. Like I said, this is totally unscripted. But before I keep going further, Robert Heinlein predicted Russia merging with the West. How Starship Troopers, the book and film, which are different, loosely paints our quote unquote nerd fascist future and explains the right wing's love of Russia, right? So there's that, right? My kind of first little intro section. So, with that being said, let's go to something here real quick I want to show you.
We celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the information purification directives we have created. For the first time in all history,
24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
Really say that I'm very excited for the IFD, and I think you're really the best hope for Germany. I think some things that something I think that is just very important is that people take pride in Germany and being German. This is very important. It's okay to be proud to be German. This is a very important principle, and it's okay. It's good to be proud of German culture, German values, and not to lose that in some sort of multiculturalism. That dilutes everything. I think we want to have unique cultures in the world. We want to have people that have, we don't want everything to be the same everywhere, where it's just one big sort of soup. We want to have something where it's you go to different countries and you experience a different culture, and it is unique and special and good, and that the German government takes actions to protect its citizens, and make sure that it seeks the health and well-being of the German people. The German people are sort of really an ancient nation, goes back thousands of years. I you should sort of read Julius Caesar's account of first encountering the German tribes in the Gaulic campaigns, and he was like, "Wow, it's very impressive. These are very very powerful warriors." I think there's frankly too much of a focus on past guilt, and we need to move beyond that. Children should not be guilty of the sins of their parents, or even let alone their parents, their great grandparents, maybe even. And we should be optimistic and excited about a future for Germany. That's really my message: is be optimistic, excited, and preserve German culture and protect the German people. And and there's some other things that I think would be very helpful too, which is I think you want more self-determination for Germany and for the countries in Europe, and less from Brussels. That's my opinion. I think there's too much bureaucracy from Brussels, too much control from sort of global elite, and
So very interesting little speech there, right? And I wanted to play those two clips. So the 1984 famous commercial by Ridley Scott on Apple Computer, right, the Macintosh, because for some reason, when I saw this Elon Musk, his face on that screen at the AFD little conference or whatnot, which is a far right German party. And I used to live in Germany, actually. I actually grew up in Mannheim, Germany, as a kid for a little bit. So Germany has a special place in my heart and everything like that. I'm an American. I'm a Black American. And what's interesting to me about decoding Elon Musk's strategy here. So first off, he's just trying to fawn to the right wing, right? for whatever reason. I think that Elon Musk, underneath a lot of his, what I would consider, even though I do think that he is kind of a race realist type person, um, is that underneath a lot of his kind of political dribble or whatnot, there's always an economic underlying agenda. He's probably trying to sell, get Starlink contracts with Germany or something like that, or whatever, right? He wants more Teslas or something in Germany, right, or whatnot. And the interesting thing about why I showed that 1984 clip mashed up against this clip of Elon talking is that when we think about dystopian science fiction novels like A Brave New World, 1984, because they were kind of written in, let's just say, the World War II era through the Cold War, where we naturally think of them as kind of talking about communism, totalitarian communism, but we rarely ever really talk about them through the lens of totalitarian fascist capitalism, right? Even though you can make the argument that that's kind of the society that, like, even like Aldous Huxley was kind of depicting. Like they literally worship Henry Ford in the novel, right? So you can't really call that society communist because they're literally worshiping one of the progenitors of modern capitalism through the assembly line and all that type of stuff, right? They literally date their years in the book, A Brave New World, as AF, after Ford. And ironically, who is Elon Musk? Another anti-Semitic conspiracy promoting, car maker, no different than Henry Ford with the International Jew, who actually won awards from the Nazi Party. And now you have Elon Musk over here, a card maker, all about the bottom line, all about crushing workers' rights, all this type of stuff, pandering to, now the second place party in the Bundestag or whatever in Germany. You know what I'm saying? Like history is repeating itself. He knows it's repeating itself. He understands history, but he also understands that he's kind of just LARPing, live action role playing, right? As a little nerd, and he's getting off on it the entire way because he knows that he's looking down on all these people to a certain extent, knowing that if he just tells them, in other words, if I just tell these people what they want, they're going to love me. It's just that simple, right? He goes wherever the wind is. If the left had still, never revolted or said anything against Elon Musk, he would probably still be on that side of the political spectrum, trying to push maybe some left wing way of taking over the world or something. But that didn't work, so now he has to go to the right wing way to do it. He's just going to do whatever it takes for the bottom line. Even though I do think he has some, I would say, pro-Nazi predilections, based off of his South African white apartheid upbringing, to a certain extent. Let me see here, and I truly believe that because I've seen interviews by his father. I'm actually happy his father's doing interviews because it actually shows more of the nightmare that raised Elon Musk to become who he is or whatnot. Where you even have his father literally calling Obama's wife a man, promoting that racist, sexist, misogynistic, dehumanizing trope, right? By basically robbing her of her agency as a female by insinuating that she's a man just because she doesn't fit into some sort of, lily white princess in a tower white beauty standard or whatnot. It's just kind of jacked up, and the fact that his father believes stuff like that is only goes to show I can only imagine the type of stuff that Elon believes, considering he was born and raised in some of the most contentious times of the apartheid regime as it was crumbling, which was probably, right of all sorts of white nationalists, they're trying to kill the white man, conspiracy theories and stuff like that and everything. Even though they're not going to look in the mirror and talk about how they subjugated an entire people, what I'm saying? Rather, it's some sort of communist Marxist plot to destroy the pioneering Germanic peoples who spread across the planet, and trek their way and everything like that with these, very romanticized country pioneering Oregon Trail tales from Australia to Canada to South Africa to America, to the United States, and everything, right? So I think Elon Musk is full of it first and foremost, obviously, as you can tell from the tone of my voice. But he's also a part of what I consider to be this kind of science fiction, Robert A. Heinlein kind of world that we're living in, right? So I wanted to kind of play that. And what's interesting, before I start reading some of my blog posts, which is a lot more coherent, is, to go back to. So actually, 1 minute. Let me do this real quick. Click on here. And it's also so funny too, right? Elon Musk, like I see right through what he's doing here. He's talking about, oh, there's too much control from Brussels, self-determination, all this type of stuff, right? He's pushing the Russian anti-EU Euroscepticism, which therefore feeds into my argument of the Russo Anglo American alliance by Robert Heinlein. You know, and it's even more haunting considering Elon Musk is kind of like the science fiction guy. He is the mad scientist who could actually possibly like help make this go forward. He's the technocrat making it happen, whereas Donald Trump and Vance are kind of just like the political underlings making it happen. And you have a bunch of street teams, from pundits, from the far right to even just Fox News, in mainstream media, owned by Rupert Murdoch, who's arguably a part of what I would consider to be this global fascist network or whatnot. They're grooming people, they're conditioning people for an eventual merger with Russia, for various reasons, from the fossil fuels, petrochemical oil industry, because Russia is ripe in that, to rare earth metals industries or whatnot, which U.S. industrialists are probably very hungry to get their hands on, and to create more monopolies and scale in the oil industry, which is one reason why they're so hostile towards the whole notion of green energy in the Paris Climate Change Agreement and all that type of stuff, right? So you have big oil on it. So when has big oil not been a part of a conspiracy? You know what I'm saying? Like, when has big oil in every single conspiracy, in the lore of, let's just say, CIA lore in America in the Cold War, not been a part of like some conspiracy and some sort of overthrow, or some sort of like disgruntled Texas oil baron who wanted JFK dead or something, right? Um, it goes on, right? So they want to merge with Russia because of whiteness. A lot of them, they're using peace as kind of like a gaslight, basically, but really it's because of racism. Really, at the core of it, it's about uniting what they consider to be a patriarchal white Christian society, to kind of hand off the baton of like the new Rome, the new right, basically, because the United States and Europe have quote unquote failed in their mission, right? So this is why you have Republicans in America, soccer moms over here talking about how they love Vladimir Putin without even really understanding all the deep history and geopolitics around it. They're just being groomed by Fox News and the podcasters that they listen to. So oil, culture, religion, and everything too. So it's very interesting. But regardless, so this is the Russo Anglo American alliance, and was a military alliance formed in the late 20th century. The alliance encompassed the armed forces of Britain. Think about Brexit, Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, the National Front, all those sort of like far right British politics. I forget the other guy's name, who's like the British little wannabe bulldog guy, Tommy Robinson or something. You got Russia, of course, Putin, Alexander Dugin, who is a philosopher who is kind of like he was kind of like the Rasputin like figure to Vladimir Putin, kind of like the little dark little underling wizard who kind of just followed him around, and he kind of gave uh, Putin the idea, arguably, of the kind of like new Russian empire, basically. In other words, because of the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia needs to think of themselves as a civilization that needs to spread in order to kind of like sustain itself. So therefore, instead, because communism went away, even though a lot of these people are still probably hardcore communists in the closet, even though they live in a quote unquote capitalist oligarchy world with Versace and Prada stores in Moscow or St. Petersburg or whatever, right? And like, in models and sex trafficked women from like Eastern Europe and the mafia and all that type of stuff. There's still, I would say, probably some apologists for the communist centralization of the Russian state, but they just shifted to a right wing version of it through, you can almost say a capitalist, fascist, oligarchy state over there. And so they want to expand back to the Iron Curtain, right? So that's why they can't allow Ukraine to be a part of NATO, right? This is why they're starting to do the stabilization efforts in Romania. This is why the Baltic countries are terrified and they're boosting their defense spending, right? This is why Poland is, even though Poland oddly is kind of like the darling of the right wing, they're also anti-Russia at the same time and everything. So it's kind of like this weird thing where like the West, you could say, which is more on kind of just say a more inclusive, accepting way, kind of tolerates Poland's kind of lean to the far right because historically the Polish people and the Russians have had a beef with each other. But that's why they're increasing defense spending. And I want to say that one of the U.S. Army's only, like I think it's V Corps or whatnot. I think is based in Poland. I think there's more troops technically in Poland now than there are in Germany. But don't quote me on that. But I think that we have a pretty large like camp level sort of army structure now in Poland. So they're very important as far as hedging against Russia's influence and by proxy China's influence and Iran's influence, right? So there's not very much to this article. More of what I'm going to be talking about is in the book itself, which I have those quotes. But it's just interesting. It's just like, let's see something here. So yeah, it was just a military alliance between Britain, Russia, and the North American Republic. And so let me do something here. Like I want, and this is what this, it seems like an open conspiracy to me that like, and nobody's really talking about it. The Russo Anglo American alliance, Chinese hegemony war, right? So this is more what I would consider to be Republicans' agenda, right? That's why they're all anti-China, fear mongering about China. When you got to think that China, which is so ironic that when you think about it, if China fully becomes a fully democratic state, that's actually the New World Order, because liberalism, because the classical liberal capitalist tradition will have taken over the whole planet, and you would actually get more globalism as a result. You know what I'm saying? Could you imagine if Chinese people right now, even though arguably they're kind of already living capitalist lives, just because they say the Communist Party, they're kind of like communists who are just controlling capitalism over there, right? Like I don't even think they have like free healthcare over there. You know what I'm saying? Like or education over there or something like. It's just the communist control things. It's a communist controlled capitalist corporatist society or something. But if let's just say that there is some sort of global conflict with China, right? Um, and America gets involved. Let's just say that the West and the Allies or whatever win, right? What are they probably going to do for a country of 1 billion people? They're probably going to break it up into little zones or something like that, right? Or whatever, just like they did in Europe. They're just going to go back to history. They're probably going to do like precision strikes on like their industry on the grounds that they can quickly rebuild those industries in order to rev up the revived capitalist machine that the Westerners are going to control in China. They're going to make a killing on windfall profits by funding both sides of the war and everything like that. And let's just say that the Allies win this or something. They're just going to embed China or these balkanized Chinese states, maybe based around ethnicity or something, into the global system based off the liberal democratic, classically liberal democratic, system. Which will be interesting is because that would actually exacerbate the depletion of resources and everything like that. So sure, in a weird, what's the word? Malthusian? In a weird Malthusian, the guy who was like, people use that term when it comes to like, you almost you'd almost say kind of like misanthropic, antinatalist. In other words, just like getting rid of people mentality. So like in this kind of weird Malthusian way, I hate to say it seems like these capitalists who want to take over the planet are just like, we'll get rid of a lot of people, probably hundreds of millions of people, and everything like that. So that kind of helps with the whole scarcity issue of resources. In other words, there's less people to feed and to demand goods and services. But then we'll rebuild the society in our own image where we truly control the entire planet from a transnationalist corporate sort of right wing system or something. And then as essentially because we reset the market to zero, we essentially can just start from zero and make even more profits as we kind of reset the pie, not the pie chart, but the line graph, right? Going up. That's what it seems like conspiracy theory, but it kind of seems like this is just the logical conclusion of war with China. You know, it's like, what's the whole goal, right? The West is ideologically anti-communist. They're communist. So obviously, if Allies win, they're going to make China capitalist, and they'll probably use, the whole framework of, psychological control from, they'll use Christian missionaries to go over there, and then they'll preach about why, communism is a satanic atheist religion or something, just so people are more conditioned or whatever to like eat McDonald's, or something. And I say this not because I'm just like ranting here. There's real proof to why this could be potentially true. For example, why is Eric Prince, the darling little GI Joe missionary crusader knight, who is a Donald Trump ally and donor, who is very deep in conservative politics, with his sister Betsy Davos, his mom Elsa Davos, I think, or Elsa Prince or whatever, or Ilsa Prince. They have connections very deep to neoconservative politics in the United States, going back decades. Why was he helping the Chinese build the Belt and Road Initiative? And this has even been talked about by, you know, um, some like special forces YouTubers or whatnot, saying it's kind of suspicious. I forgot what it is. It's like, I think I watch him sometimes. I think it's like Jack Dorsey or something. It's like the Home Team podcast, Team House podcast. It's like it's a podcast that talks about like CIA special forces stuff, right? So more on the military type grunt type, podcast circuit. Even they had stuff about like why it was kind of fishy that Eric Prince was essentially working with the Chinese on a pro-Chinese infrastructure project, which makes me think that like the same way how there's a lot of kind of shadowy things about World War One and World War Two, makes me think that is Eric Prince and others setting the dynamite for World War Three, pretending that they're not, but they're doing so in a way so like they can almost exacerbate the conflict. But so when the conflict happens, not only do they benefit and profit from it, they also kind of help in the rebuilding process and profiting from that. You know what I'm saying? In other words, like he's helping China become more of an economic threat to the United States, which would actually make the United States, increase more military presence in Asia to curb that influence. And it's like a weird, I hate saying this corny term, but like 4D chess sort of thing that they're doing, it seems. But but let me see here. So uh, the Russo American alliance. Just want to do something real quick here. Hmm. Yeah, I can't think of the name of the podcast off the top of my head. But anyways, right. So here we go. So the Russian Anglo American alliance, Chinese hegemony war. So in 2041, the following, the Russian Anglo American alliance was at war with the Chinese hegemony on Earth. At the end of the war in 2130, the Treaty of New Delhi was signed, which freed prisoners captured by the alliance. The war led to two British divisions of paratroopers getting captured in Japan, the Philippines, and Russia, and sentenced for political crimes. The Treaty of New Delhi angered the veterans, and the Aberdeen militia formed in 2032. So in November 1st, 2125, and April 17th, 2126, the revolt of the scientists is a revolt of higher intellectual persons from multiple nations that attempted to take control of the government, though it fails. So it's very interesting, right? So the revolt of the scientists is kind of like, and I've seen this in certain analyses videos about Starship Troopers, like people like Sargon of Akkad and others, is that the thing about certain analyses videos about Starship Troopers is that they're typically done, not always, but some of the original ones were done by right wingers, right? And their argument was that the revolt of the scientists was essentially a revolt against what they would consider to be modern liberals, right? The bureaucrats, the technocrats, the Faucis, all that type of stuff, right? The people, the intellectuals, right, who come up with all the acronyms and everything, right? So in this society, what they're saying was there's a revolt of kind of like this liberal intelligentsia, right? But they failed, right? But in October 19, 2132, the Aberdeen militia, right? So in other words, you could think of them as like the 3%ers, right? Or like some sort of militia group, right? Completely succeeded in overthrowing the control of the gangs in Aberdeen, Scotland. So the day is now known as Federation Day. So the thing was that you had this World War III thing, right? You can almost say that the West kind of lost to a certain extent. It's not really explained anywhere in the book about what happened to the Chinese hegemony type thing. It sounds like, or like what could happen to China essentially, because it doesn't seem like in the book or even in the movie that like China has much sway, unless like there's just unforeseen parts of the canon in which like maybe the Earth is just kind of like divided or something, or like I don't know, or maybe China did lose the war, but because it sounds like the Allies, quote unquote, received heavy losses at this, and they were forced to sign this New Delhi Treaty type thing, which angered the West, right? So obviously China put up a good enough fight in order to have some sort of truce, but regardless, now I'm going off into like speculative science fiction nerd stuff, but it's just very interesting. So after the war, the earth was kind of like in shatters, right? And like cities were kind of like these lawless places, right? So this kind of harkens to like what all the conservatives are saying about democratic cities and crime and homelessness and like lawlessness and BLM. They destroyed all this property and all this type of stuff, right? And then but like I guess the brain leaders behind those movements tried to like take over and they failed or something, and then it took the right wing militias to basically take over, and they created this kind of veteran based society where if only people who served in the military can vote. So it's all based on meritocracy, right? And this is where we start getting more into like Heinlein's actual philosophy. So the science fiction is really just layering his actual philosophy about how a society should work, right? And it's almost a very voluntarist, libertarian type world that kind of splices elements of socialism and libertarianism. You can almost say, and I know it's counterintuitive to some people, but there is something called libertarian socialism. And I'm not saying that like this is what he is by definition, but in a way he's kind of splicing certain elements of both, where like you have the government who is almost like I said, this police state, and it's almost this kind of like Plato Republic, in which only the virtuous, who basically by the people who serve in the military, are only worthy of voting. But you can still exist in that society as a civilian and everything like that. You just aren't granted the franchise to vote because you didn't make the ultimate sacrifice for the society overall. But the society, very interestingly, is kind of like, basically, you can almost say the veterans are kind of like the state, but anybody who's not a part of the state who still lives in these states, they're kind of like the civilian libertarians who are kind of just like homesteading, doing whatever they want, but they don't necessarily get all the protections and benefits afforded to, you know, the veterans. And it's almost kind of like Robert Heinlein is trying to create some sort of classical Greek, Athenian, Spartan type system, right? Which is very interesting because I would say that he's almost trying to create a Plato-based state, like Plato's the Republic and everything, which is interestingly one of the philosophies of Plato are some of the larger underpinnings of modern conservative and neoconservative politics. That's what they call themselves Republicans. They don't believe in democracy. They believe in a few being able to vote based on certain restrictions. Back in the past, you had to be a white male landowner. Then the actual Jacksonian Democrats came in the early 1800s as America was expanding at the dawn in the fruition of the Manifest Destiny era of the early Democrats, um, in which they expanded the franchise to just all white men, regardless of whether they own property and everything like that. And then eventually the franchise evolved, eventually to include women's suffrage, and then later black people being allowed to vote again after, or rather, black people being allowed to vote without the threat of violence, essentially in gerrymandering and being disenfranchised by having their votes reduced, particularly as Confederate veterans took over um, the state legislatures after the withdrawal of federal troops by Rutherford B. Hayes during the Reconstruction era, right? So it's very interesting, right? So it's there's something I get, I'll probably play some other videos or something about it that kind of explains it a little bit better. But as far as I'm concerned, what we're experiencing in real life with this kind of technocratic state that these billionaires want, which is arguably based on the philosophies of Plato, they just see themselves as the wise men who oversee everybody else. But then you have the traditional, American conservative politics more in bed with like evangelical Christianity. So this is where the Christian nationalist comes in with their ideas of the Plato state or whatnot. So you have the technocrats of Musk, you have the Christian nationalists who both want this, Plato's Republic state. And what's interesting is that Musk, Thiel, Bezos, Gates, all these other type of people, they represent the technocrats version, right? Whereas you could say that the Bannons, the evangelical Christians, the Pat Buchanans, the Heritage Foundation, Cato Institute, they represent more of like your modern classical liberal neoconservative, more not as technocratic Plato followers, basically. In other words, they see Monticello and like the founding fathers as a continuation of the classical Greco-Roman tradition. That's how they see it, right? In other words, they want the United States to be like a classical Greek state in which not everybody's allowed to vote. That's what they want. And their barrier of entry is money. In other words, the wealthy are allowed to basically rule because they see it as them being competent enough in being able to run a society, whereas the masses are to be feared, right? That's their philosophy, right? So you have the technocratic Platonists, you have the Christian nationalist, traditional Republican Platonists, and everything like that, right? And what's interesting is that between those two camps, you have JD Vance. JD Vance is kind of like the plug between the two because not only is he the byproduct of the Silicon Valley venture capitalist via Peter Thiel, so he can talk to all the nerds who want to create this caste system based society, like books like A Brave New World and everything like that, where you had all these different castes of alphas, betas, gammas, and everything too. He also is able to talk to the theocratic people who are more in the Christian nationalist front. So that's why they made JD Vance vice president, is because they basically gave so much money to uh, Trump. Even though Trump will take these people's money, he still doesn't like being told what to do. They basically told him to make JD Vance the vice president, so he's an assurance policy. Either if Trump passes away, or because Trump, if he actually relinquishes power and everything like that, in the next election, JD Vance is naturally the successor who will probably run, who unites the technocrats and also the theocratic bros and Christian nationalists who have all their little pundits and stuff like that, like who have all their weird little pundits like the Deus Vult, Catholic Bros, what I like to call the New Puritans, the people like Matt Walsh and all these type of people. People who kind of want society to be like The Handmaid's Tale. In other words, like men really should be the only ones allowed to vote. A woman's place is in the home, type thing, right? JD Vance is kind of symbolic of both camps and everything too, and he's kind of juggling the policy war, or I'm not saying he's actively juggling it, but he's just in between the tug of war between the Steve Bannon camp, who are more in the religious Platonist group, versus the technocratic atheist, scientist, scientific Darwinist, um, libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, Ayn Randians type people of Atlas Shrugged type people of like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, right? So JD Vance is a nexus between those two and everything. And then you could even also make the argument of there's also Zionist Platonists, right? Because by proxy of the Israeli and Zionist lobbies' closeness to the Republican Party and evangelical Christianity, is that they even have, look at the state of Israel right now, and what's going on there. Look at the state they're creating, right? An ethno-nationalist little republic, right? In which there's all these like, different rules for different people and different driver's licenses and checkpoints or whatnot. But, the Zionist group, they also have what I call like their apparatus of control over the people, which is called the Noahide laws. And this is why in the United States, interestingly, we're seeing stuff called anti-BDS laws, which are anti-boycott, divest, and sanction laws, which are actually on the books in many states, which basically says you cannot protest the state of Israel, otherwise you could lose your job or you can lose state or federal financing for contracts, right? For protesting the state of Israel or not wanting to do business with them. So a foreign country has that much influence on the United States by way of the Republican Party in Christian nationalist politics, in the evangelical movement. They allow that to happen, right? And and there's like Noahide laws, where essentially Noahide laws are kind of like laws that like Gentiles are supposed to follow while within Jewish societies and everything. So that's a whole nother can of worms. It's just the overall goal of conservatives, regardless of what camp they fall in, technocrats, traditionalists, neoconservative, Christian moral majority politics, right-wing Jewish Zionist politics, even an emerging, burgeoning right-wing Indian caste system-based conservatism or whatnot. What are the similarities between all of those different variants underneath this kind of Platonic way of thinking? Is a caste system. They want to live in a society of classes in which certain classes are afforded different rights than other ones based on what they consider to be quote unquote meritocracy, even meritocracy of the will, which is why They like to invoke, particularly more like your far right modernist, quasi-Nazi type stuff. They like to invoke imagery of Nietzsche, right? The Ubermensch, right? The man who like looks into the abyss, doesn't care about any morality. He's just a survivor who's going to survive by any means necessary, right? So they believe in meritocracy of the will, some of the technocrats, but then also in a even more sinister way, you have people who believe in meritocracy of the blood or heritage. In other words, race realism. In other words, certain races, and this is where we start getting into racial sciences and IQs and stuff like that, right? Which are always going to be on the fringes of conservative right-wing politics. And this even goes back to books like The Bell Curve with people like Charles Murray. And I made a video about how what's his name, Sagar and Jetty or whatnot, of who was the co-host with Crystal Ball on The Hill, I want to say, or not The Hill. They have their own show or something now, but I think Sagar and Jetty, right, who I actually met in person, admitted to actually liking some of Charles Murray's stuff. Charles Murray is a controversial white supremacist thinker who essentially helped to push the whole notion of race realist IQ science, which harkens back to even earlier versions of early 20th century stuff that arguably went to go inspire the Nazis. So like that's why people are fearful. You know what I'm saying? And it's like I feel, and it's kind of exhausting because you're connecting all these dots that are apparent and they've persisted throughout history, but it's like we always have to kind of keep reconnecting the dots to keep an eye on what they're actually doing, keeping an eye on the right wing, and it gets kind of just exhausting. So much so where like you're trying to explain this stuff to just like your family members or people on the street or something. They're more likely to look to you as being crazy more so than they are the Elon Musk, the Teals, the Heritage Foundation or Project 2025, Opus Dei, and all these other type of groups, right? So the underlying society that Heinlein wants is a Plato-based society, right? And we'll go more. I'm sorry, I keep saying right. That's me talking to myself. But we'll go more into details about that, right? So let me see here. So this is actually kind of a cool photo, actually, of Robert Heinlein. And let me make sure so my volume is actually still good. So this is actually, there's kind of a cool photo too of him. And then I'm really surprised that no one on YouTube just created some video like this already. You know what I'm saying? Like, because I'm not a professional YouTuber. Like, I don't really have the time. I keep making that excuse, but it's just I just don't really want to. Really, like, I need to get better at making actual videos. I can admit that I'm just not good at it. Or know how to. So I just kind of just do these type of more presentation videos. But it's interesting, right? So let me go here. So there's that. And let me play this right here. So this is actually the Zelensky speech, right? So we played the Elon Musk speech where you can basically just kind of pick through what he's doing there, and let me see here. Let me play the Zelensky speech thing.
Of America and for the good of the world. I'm aligned with the world, and I want to get this thing over with. You see the hatred he's got for Putin. It's very tough for me to make a deal with that kind of hate. He's got tremendous hatred, and I understand that, but I can tell you the other side isn't exactly in love with, him either. So it's not a question of alignment. I'm aligned with the world. I want to get the thing set. I'm aligned with Europe. I want to see if we can get this thing done. You want me to be tough? I could be tougher than any human being you've ever seen. I'd be so tough. But you're never going to get a deal that way. So that's the way it goes. All right, one more question.
Hey, I want to respond to this. So look, For 4 years in the United States of America, we had a president who stood up at press conferences and talked tough about Vladimir Putin, and then Putin invaded Ukraine and destroyed a significant chunk of the country. The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. We tried the pathway of Joe Biden of thumping our chest and pretending that the President of the United States' words mattered more than the President of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So he occupied our parts, big parts of Ukraine, part of East and Crimea. So he occupied it on 2014. So during a lot of years, so I'm not speaking about just Biden, but those time was Obama, then President Obama, then President Trump, then President Biden, now President Trump, and God bless, now President Trump will stop him. But during 2014, nobody stopped him. He just occupied and took. He killed people. You know what the contact line?
2015.
2014.
2014 and 2014.
2014.
Yeah. So
I was not here.
Yeah, but
That's exactly right.
Yes, but during 2014 till 2022, yeah, the situation the same. The people have been dying on the contact line. Nobody stopped him. You know that we had conversations with him, a lot of conversation, my bilateral conversation, and we signed with him, me, like a new president. In 2019, I signed with him the deal. I signed with him, Macron and Merkel, we signed ceasefire. Ceasefire. All of them told me that he will never go. We signed him with gas contract. Gas contract. Yes, but after that, he broken this ceasefire. He killed our people and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the President for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Count once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military?
We have problems.
And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems, even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's exactly what you're doing.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influenced.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influenced.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards.
Playing cards.
Right now, you don't.
You're
playing cards.
Mr. President.
You're playing cards.
Serious.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country, that's back to you, far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once? This
A lot
entire
of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today.
have you said thank you?
Even today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you can...
He's not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country's in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No,
Can
you've
I
done a lot
answer?
of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning.
I know.
You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President, We are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
You haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this cabinet.
We gave you, through
I
this
said
stupid president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military equipment,
You
and you
voted
men
for
are
your
brave, but they had to use our military.
What about
if you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me-
equipment,
you invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak-
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days, this is something
Maybe
new.
less.
In 2 weeks, of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this. I tell you.
Just say thank you.
I said a lot of times thank you to American people.
Accept that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on. I think it's very important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the
I'm
cards.
thankful.
You're buried there. Your people are dying.
tell you
You're
again,
running
I
low
know.
on soldiers. Listen,
Don't please
you're running
be
low on
surprised.
soldiers. It would be a damn good thing.
Mr.
And
President.
then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go, and I want this. Look, if you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're saying you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a ceasefire.
with guarantees.
Because you'll get a ceasefire faster than an agreement.
Ask our people about ceasefire, what they think.
That wasn't
doesn't
with
matter
me.
for you what-
That wasn't
what
with
this
me.
means. It
That was
wasn't
with
with you.
a guy named Biden, who was not a smart person.
But this
That
is
was
your,
with,
this
that was
is
with
your
Obama.
president. It was your president.
Excuse me. That was with Obama, who gave you sheets, and I gave you javelins.
Yes.
I gave you the javelins to take out all those tanks. Obama gave you sheets. In fact, the statement is, Obama gave sheets and Trump gave javelins. You got to be more thankful. Because let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards. But without us, you don't have any cards.
One more question to Mr. Vice President. I'm sorry.
It's going to be a tough deal to make.
Um,
Because the attitudes have to change.
what if Russia breaks ceasefire? What if Russia breaks peace talks? What do we do then? I understand that it's a heated conversation right now.
What are you saying?
What
She's
if
asking, what if Russia breaks the ceasefire?
What if anything? What if a bomb drops on your head right now?
But they have
Okay?
broken ceasefire.
What if they broke it? I don't know. They broke it with Biden because Biden, they didn't respect him. They didn't respect Obama. They respect me.
But what-
Let me tell you, Putin went through a hell of a lot with me. He went through a phony witch hunt where they used him and Russia. Russia. You ever hear of that deal? That was a phony Hunter Biden, Joe Biden scam. Hillary Clinton, Shifty Adam Schiff. It was a Democrat scam. And he had to go through that. And he did go through it. We didn't end up in a war. And he went through it. He was accused of all that stuff. He had nothing to do with it. It came out of Hunter Biden's bathroom. It came out of Hunter Biden's bedroom. It was disgusting. And then they said, oh, the laptop from hell was made by Russia. The 51 agents. The whole thing was a scam. And he had to put up with that. He was being accused of all that stuff. All I can say is this. He might have broken deals with Obama and Bush, and he might have broken them with Biden. He did, maybe. Maybe he didn't. I don't know what happened. But he didn't break them with me. He wants to make a deal. I don't know if you can make a deal. The problem is, I've empowered you to be a tough guy. And I don't think you'd be a tough guy without the United States. And your people are very brave. But you're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but you'll fight it out. But you don't have the cards. But once we sign that deal, you're in a much better position. But you're not acting at all thankful. And that's not a nice thing. I'll be honest, that's not a nice thing. All right, I think we've seen enough. What do you think? Huh? This is going to be great television, I will say that. All right. We'll see what we can do about putting it together. Thanks. I need the back of this. We'll see, I don't know. Guys, come on, let's move, please. If we didn't win, I think this could have very well ended up in a third world war, and that would not have been a good situation. Well,
So yeah, I just wanted to play that there too. So it's just very interesting, and it's kind of like a very interesting speech by Trump and Vance kind of chiming in, and they're almost kind of coming in. They're essentially they kind of jumped Zelensky. You got to be real. Like, he doesn't really speak the best English. He understands what they're saying. You got to understand that certain words and context or meanings and you know rules of thumb and how we speak or something. He's translating in real time, but he has two people on national TV kind of ganging up on him, right? And with even some of these Trump loyalists over here bringing up nonsense about his suit and everything, like they're turning it into a sensationalist Fox News segment. And the Fox News and Republican people are already on the defense, saying that doing what they're doing, right? Because the conservatives, I think, are a lot more united than like the left and Democrats are. So they're always gonna stand up and fight for their man, basically. But it's just interesting that Zelensky kind of got jumped there. He got lured into this play. It reminds me of the meme of Joe Pesci from Goodfellas or whatever. I think that's the movie Goodfellas, and like where he walks into like the room or whatever, and he ends up getting like shot basically when he thinks he's about to become a made man. That's kind of what went on here a little bit. I'm sure there's already memes about that happening already or whatever. Because everything in the hyper reality that we live in, right? But it's just jacked up because not once did they really ever point the finger at Russia. It wasn't like even saying that like Russia invaded. They did not even give philosophical or optics top cover to Ukraine. It wasn't like oh man, Russia invaded your country. They were in the wrong for that. But like the war has to end. It can't sustain itself and everything like that. Without us coming to a deal, right? They could have just given Zelensky that, but they didn't want to give Zelensky anything because they are ideologically opposed to Zelensky. Because the truth of the matter is they are pro-Russia. They couldn't even get the optics to Zelensky to like even like give him something to take back home. They wanted total surrender from Zelensky and total admittance of fault by Zelensky and the Ukrainians, who have basically been fighting for the West and everything like that, right? To put a stake in the ground of saying that like Russia, like you shall not pass, without coming and talking to us and whatever, right? But they couldn't even give Zelensky that. If you want to end the war and you really want a win-win situation, how is the win-win embarrassing the person who, philosophically speaking, is more in alignment with the West than your opponent? Unless you guys want to be more like your opponent, which are the Russians and the Kremlin and the FRB, KGB, what have you, right? So this is insane. I already know Russian media is using this interview, splicing it up, because Russian media has already used American right wingers on their national TV. They've used Tucker Carlson, they've used Alex Jones, they've used Lauren Southern. Now they're basically going to have free footage for all eternity of JD Vance and Donald Trump essentially creating top cover and an excuse and a license for Russia to have done what they did and everything like that. It's hard to, in other words, we all know already, but Trump is of this kind of like it's NATO's fault. Is NATO's fault, basically. Even though that's kind of debatable because there was no actual signed treaty saying that Ukraine couldn't join NATO or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Like there was like some sort of discussion underneath George H.W. Bush that was like a policy memo or something or a note, but it was never ratified by our Congress and everything like that, upholding some sort of treaty and everything like that, right? So there's complicated stuff about who's to blame here, but regardless, the people who shot the first bullets were the Russians. And this is a country who, even before Ukraine and South Ossetia and Crimea and all these places, right, they were actively hostile towards U.S. foreign policy. So, like, let's just say that America never even did anything for Ukraine. Russia had done enough to still be a pariah state to the United States. So using Ukraine to create top cover for Russia for their actions is just you liking Russia at a certain moment in time. And maybe Trump has some sort of calculus here, right? Or something or whatever, right? Maybe he thinks that getting out of NATO and putting them on the Europeans and scaring them into increasing their defense spending will kind of create more of a united European force to actually hedge against Russia, so the United States can do a geostrategic pivot to Asia, which, as I said at the beginning of the video, is kind of what they really want to do. And this goes back to Steve Bannon and his obsession with China. This goes back to the Falun Gong cult in the Epoch Times being some of the biggest donors to Trump. The Asia, from a racial, economic, and ideological standpoint, poses more of a threat to white Western conservatism. So therefore, they're the enemy, and they don't see Russia as an enemy. So they're trying to divide those two. But in the event, but they still technically maybe don't trust them. Some more than others in this camp, this kind of Trumpian, pro-Russia camp or whatever. So in the event that altercations happens between China and the United States, let's just say like over Taiwan or the South China Sea or something like that, that hopefully, the Europeans can kind of, worry about the other front, the Western front or something against Russia, in case they actually turn up to be an actual double trader or something like that, and actually help the Chinese push more deeper into like Europe or something. So there's a lot going on here, right? A lot of like different trajectories that can happen here. And I think that this is what the conservatives think is they want to unite with Russia for racial, economic, energy, cultural reasons. They want to sever the Sino-Russian relationship. They want to put more focus on Europeans to increase their own defense by threatening to withdraw from NATO. And then they want to geostrategically pivot towards the Middle East for the benefit of Israel with countries like Iran. And they also want to geostrategically pivot to China over the Straits, the South China Sea. The fact of the matter is that they're basically just like one of the largest economy, and not necessarily pound for pound the strongest economy, but a billion people. Let's be real. And Taiwan, where the semiconductor chips are and everything like that, right? Which is why they're trying to build back better, bring back jobs to the United States, and they're trying to subsidize Taiwan Semiconductor, Intel foundries, a lot of interestingly the bills that Biden passed, the Chips Act and stuff like that. They're trying to bring those chip jobs over to our hemisphere and with heavy federal subsidies in order to hedge against the potential loss of Taiwan and everything like that. So that's just kind of what's going on here. It seems like the Democratic strategy was, no. It's almost an opposite to a certain extent, because they understand that, like, even though China is an enemy, because of how immersed things still are with China, you can't just like rush this conflict without having like severe consequences and everything like that, right? But in other words, the Democrats are more focusing on the lower hanging fruit of Russia, whereas it seems like Republicans want to rush and accelerate the dogfight, the heavyweight fight with China. So I think the Democrats are more from this perspective of, deal with the people who you can actually deal with, right? Who are actively being hostile, and prevent them from getting more power, so we don't have to worry about that later and everything like that. And one thing you do is you kind of start pushing closer to Russia, basically, and because we don't owe Russia anything, because they don't owe us anything. You know what I'm saying? Put it this way. Like, we have Mexico on our border. Mexico has like cartels, other things like that, which are actual security threats or whatnot. the United States hasn't invaded Mexico. We try to deal with it in different ways, right? Through cooperation with the Mexican Marines and their government or whatnot to like share information and have these like, large kind of like busts and stuff like that, right? To take down like cartels and everything. And you can say you can argue there's a lot of flaws in that strategy, right? You can definitely argue there's a lot of flaws in that strategy, right? Which is why, all these conservatives are kind of getting hard, basically talking about using, tier one operators and Delta Force people to go like take out Mexican cartels on Mexican soil and stuff, right? But we never invaded Mexico. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I'm saying? And it's like, it's just so interesting to me. It's like Russia has so much land to begin with, and Russia also constantly tries to like mess with our airspace. You hear about it all the time. At Elmendorf Air Force Base, they had to scramble F-35s or F-22s to go chase the Russians out of our airspace or something, right? Like Russia is not some like innocent player here, but it seems that like the Republicans in their strategy, which mimics the Russian Anglo American alliance, they're just trying to placate Russia so much to wean them away from China, I think. But then also they see it as another net positive of oil is going to flow, minerals are going to flow, timber is going to flow, industrialists are going to get money. They've kind of pornified Russian Eastern European women, which is why you have a lot of the manosphere dating rights, dating self-help coaches, going to Ukraine and Russia to try to like pitch their game and shoot their shot and everything. Unfortunately, a lot of women from Eastern Europe were exploited by the kind of like, mail order bride kind of stereotype, you know, which is very kind of demeaning towards them. But a lot of conservative men and a lot of the subcultures within conservatism, like the men's rights movement, manosphere, red pill, dating guru coaches, the Andrew Tates, the Fresh and Fits type stuff, the Rollo Tomasi type stuff, right? They're all about Trump because really they're also about this kind of notion of kind of like having a beautiful domesticated conservative wife because they can't find it in the West, right? So there's also that, right? So energy, oil, women, um, kind of the preservation of what they consider to be the white race or something against what they consider to be the quote unquote Jewish conspiracy of George Soros, which is so ironic because like Donald Trump is highly pro-Israel, right? Like it's so interesting to me. And what's interesting is that the George Soros conspiracy theory, and you can look this up yourself, was actually created by two Jewish consultants, I think Finkelstein and Bomberg or Baumstein or something. But you can look that up. It was like just type in Finkelstein and Soros, and like I think like an article is going to pop up about how you can almost two Jewish guys push one of the biggest anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, right? Which kind of had a double-edged sword effect, right? Because by pushing conspiracy theory against the Jewish people, and I'm not trying to go off the tangent and make this video about Jewish people or anything, because anti-Semitism is wrong. But the interesting thing about George Soros, because this has had a massive effect on where we are today, while we have the talking points that you're basically hearing from JD Vance and George Soros, is that they push this George Soros conspiracy theory to push global anti-Semitism, so the lobbying groups like the ADL and the World Jewish Coalition or whatever can basically educate everybody about the dangers of anti-Semitism, so they can actually start pushing more laws to clamp down on free speech against protest against the state of Israel. So it's like they got the best of both worlds, They're able to push at the forefront the problems of actual real world anti-Semitism in order to, restrict free speech and everything like that with anti-BDS laws or whatever have you, right? But then they're also able to silence any sort of criticism against Israel because they mix anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. Because for the Zionists, they don't see a difference between the two. And this is where you get Barry Weiss from and Laura Loomer's from You can even make the argument for Bill Maher and everything like that, whose mother I want to say is Jewish. So technically he is Jewish, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the Israeli Jewish Zionist component is a big part of this overarching right wing white nationalist component and everything as well, which is why you have people like Stephen Miller in the White House and Laura Loomer as one of his biggest cheerleaders and stuff like that, right? And you have what's his name, Levin or something? The guy, I forgot his name. It goes on and on. A lot of connections, right? But this specific video right here, like I said, is getting a little too long. So this will be part 1, and I'm going to do a part 2. So more to come here soon. All right, thank you. All right, bye.